Hey friends, welcome to what I hope will be the ultimate X-Plane and X-Camera tutorial. Here we are in beautiful Southern California. We're at Los Angeles International Airport. We're not parked at a gate, we're in one of the outer lying areas. I believe we're in the Delta Maintenance Facility. But you can see the expanding sprawl of the Los Angeles Basin. There's downtown LA there in the distance. You can't see it from here, but I know somewhere beyond there is the famous Hollywood sign. Some of the other landmarks that make up this famous airport. Anyway, I've been enjoying Microsoft Flight Simulator so much that it's taken me a little while to get back to X-Plane 11, but I do enjoy it, and I especially enjoy it with the X-Camera program. I very much hope that in the near future there'll be an X-Camera functioning program for Microsoft Flight Simulator, but in the meantime we have this one. And the way I use my X-Camera is with a piece of hardware called an Orbweaver, made by Razer, R-A-Z-E-R, and I'm going to pull up its controlling program called Synops. This is the configuration screen for the Synops program, and you can define different profiles. So this is set up for Microsoft Flight Simulator, and it's linked actually to the Flight Simulator program. But I don't, right now I don't have a specific X-Plane configuration. But what I'd like you to do is when you first plug in your your Orbweaver, your system will recognize it, load this software called Synops, and you will get each of these 20 keys with the keyboard assignment. Keyboard 1, Keyboard 2, Keyboard 3, and that's what comes as default. It's an extension of your keyboard. Well, that's all well and good if you want to push keyboard commands, but what I want to do is I want to use it as another joystick and make joystick assignments, just as if I had another throttle quadrant or another joystick. So go ahead and push on left click on a key, and you'll see it's on default or keyboard function. Scroll down to where it says joystick, hit joystick, and then assign a button number, and you can choose up to 24. Now there are 20 main buttons on the Orbweaver, and then 4 special or extra ones, and I'll show you those in just a bit. But what I do is, for each button, I assign it a corresponding joystick number. So there's joystick button 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, and 20. And those are my main controllable views. I've given myself 20 views, all accessible with my left hand using the Orbweaver. Now if I move to side view, these are by default the space bar on the bottom and the Alt key on the top. But you can configure these if you'd like to make these joystick buttons. You can. Right, it's by default it's a keyboard function. Actually, I set the top one to C. I think I did that with my Microsoft Pushback Express. I did that so I can contact ground control at Microsoft Pushback Express. But again, you can assign it to anything. You can make a macro out of it if you're familiar with making macros. Many other functions to that keyboard assignment. But I usually make mine in a joystick. Now, these side buttons, I don't use these 2 side buttons, and there's also a small joystick here available for programming as well. You can make it directional, or you can make them into even more buttons. 8 more programmable buttons, if you ever needed that many buttons, or you can keep it as directional as it is here. But again, I don't really use the side. It is available to you. And one other thing you have, I shouldn't get into that. Okay, let's go back to the top view. So you've got 20 available views. Here's, I'm going to push this off to the side, and I'm going to bring up the X-plane, X-camera control panel. Now, when you first load an airplane, X-camera. Now, I know this can be daunting at first. Don't let it be daunting. I'm going to eliminate the bottom part just to make it a little less daunting. X-camera will automatically assign 2 categories. I believe 2 categories: a cockpit category and an external category, and 1 view for each category. A pilot view and I believe a tail view is the 2 categories that it automatically assigns when it starts a new aircraft. Now, the easiest way to populate these new categories, and under each category you'll have a string of cameras available. The easiest way to do that without building them yourself, and I'll show you how to build them yourself in just a bit, is to go to File, Browse Community, and then type in just exactly what you see here, Mark E, M-A-R-K, M-A-R-K-E, and he has your permission to do this, so don't worry about him. Mark E is an employee at Stick and Rudder Studios, and he has developed several profiles for different aircraft. Not all of them are commercial jetliners. As a matter of fact, very few of them are commercial jetliners. Mark E tends to like smaller airplanes. But here you can see he has a profile for an aircraft called the C4. That aircraft has 73 cameras in 7 different categories. But we want a plane, we want a 737 or a plane similar in size to a 737. Doesn't have to be a 737. Here's the C400, all created by Mark E. That's the filter we put in. There's a Cessna 172. But remember his name, because not only is he a good guy as far as making profiles for the community, an employee of Stick and Rudder Studios, but he also has taken the time to do the very labor-intensive task of making the animated views, and that is very important. Now here's an A320neo. Now the Airbus A320 is very similar in size to the 737, so you could use this one if you wanted to. There are 75 cameras in 6 categories, but as much as possible, it's best to find the actual aircraft that you're in. And I know he has, there's a 737. 74 air cameras, 7 categories. Click the Try to Autocorrect Cockpit in case there's a variation in the type of aircraft or the exact nature of the aircraft. This will allow the program to try to autocorrect for some differences. It won't make things perfect, but it will help. And then you can choose Import File. And when you do, you're going to get that 74 cameras in 7 categories. I just want to take a look outside real quick. Something, I thought there was something big was moving around me and making a lot of noise. I don't know what it was. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it. Anyway, so once you've imported Mark E's programs, you're going to have all these categories and most all of these cameras. Mark E and I don't necessarily see eye to eye as far as how the cameras should be aimed or what cameras have priority. But one thing I do like is the labor he's taken into setting up these 3 animations. Now, an animation is when you take several external camera views. Here you can see animation here, all the camera views that go along with that. Pre-flight 2, 4, 5, tail, 11, 12. He's taken all these cameras and he's gone through the process of linking them all together using these advanced keys. And I'm not going to go into this. There are videos showing you how to do that, but it's a time-consuming, laborious process of moving around the aircraft and setting up different cameras and then linking them all together. But what we can do is, when we get rid of this, you can watch the animation screen and you can see what the animation looks like when it's completed. And you can assign that to one of your buttons. So while you're here on the ground, you can do an external check, make these move a little slower if you wanted to do a thorough external check. Or what most people use these for are aerial views. You want to get some screenshots. Now this particular one is set up to be used on the ground, and you'll notice it holds a fairly linear camera movement around the axis of the aircraft, the one axis of the aircraft. But there's another animation. This is meant to be used in flight. Now you see how it goes underground for a little bit. You wouldn't generally use this one on the ground because it spoils the illusion as the camera pans right through the ground. But while you're in flight, you can imagine this is a wonderful animation. And then a very common animation that people enjoy is called the flyby. And the flyby is simply when you're seeing the aircraft from head-on, it passes your relative location and continues along its flight path. So that's it. Those three animations I have set up: an orbit, and an animation for ground, an orbit, and a flyby. And that's the advantage of downloading someone else's pre-configured profile. So I start out with Cockpit, Pilot View, and the first thing you'll want to do is assign this. Now there are a lot, and remember there are 74 cameras all told between all the categories and all the subcategories. That's well more than you need or want. So you'll need to do a little mental prioritizing. Remember, we only have 20 buttons available to us. Joysticks 1 through 20. And what I generally like to do is to keep these in the same function. In other words, the first row are what I call the special buttons, and they do special things. Joystick 1 button changes the categories. You can see there's cockpit category, animation, gear, animation, orbit, flyby, internal. Button number 2 changes the cameras inside the flight deck, and this one goes through every single camera, whether or not there is a camera ID assigned to it. Now this is the co-pilot view. I never use the co-pilot view, but it's here and it's available. Just by using my number 2 button and toggle through all the cameras, it goes through these views that I very rarely would use. Oh, you can see every little blemish on my co-pilot's face with that view, can't you? Her name is Christy. She's my virtual first officer. Anyway, so I use the number 2 button to toggle through the subcategories. And then the number 3 button does the same thing, but in reverse. So if you find a view that you find interesting and you want to go back to it, you can toggle back and forth using the 2 and 3 buttons. The number 4 button only toggles through views that have a camera ID. Now these camera ID views are going to be the more important ones. So if you want to get somewhere in a hurry, you'd use the number 4 button. And the number 5 button is the airport button. Now, when you first come to a brand new airport, go to the menu, choose Airport File, create Airport File, and then pick an airport. I've already done LAX, but here's Santa Monica. Santa Monica is a land airport. It's now, right now, we're directly over the airport. There's the Santa Monica Airport right below us. But it only has the one camera. It's directly over the airport. But what I want to do, well, boy, that's a I love that. I love this general aviation airport. So what I'll do is to go to Airport File, create airport cameras, and it's going to populate these fields with airport cameras all along the taxiways, all along the runways, and at parking spaces all through the airport. So we'll push create. Here we go. Now again, this is just a small general aviation field, so there aren't a monster number of cameras, but there are enough of them. Here at starting locations, you can see the helipad, there's the tower, the run-up areas, the transient parking, south parking area, viewpoints from the tower, runways, both 3.2 and 03 and 2.1, and different signs all along the airport. Every sign, there's a marker. Now, here's why I did that. I want to save all those cameras. So whenever I'm in Santa Monica, I now have a whole bunch of external airport file cameras. And you can do that to every airport in the world. You'll probably end up doing it once when you first start using an airport. And then once you've done it once, you'll never need to do it again. So we'll go back to Los Angeles. And one of my buttons, my number 5 button, is what's called the nearest airport button. So let's say you're taxiing down the taxiway and you hit the nearest airport camera button and you're near a particular sign. Well, that camera at that sign is going to turn toward your taxiing aircraft and you'll be able to enjoy the external view as you taxi past that sign or as you taxi past whatever external camera is there. So, and now that you've created an airport file, now you can open the airport file. I wonder why only... I think I created the airport, but last time I was here, I forgot to save it. So, create airport cameras. Now this is a monster airport. So it is going to have a lot. Delta maintenance, Qantas maintenance, Sheraton Hotel Gateway, Helipod Marriott, Helipod Ground Plaza, Residence Inn, Embassy Inn, Terminal Position 9, Terminal 17A, Terminal this, Terminal that. Monster number of cameras. And go ahead and save those. And next time you are... So here's an airport camera. And all I did is push my number 5 button. And my number 5 button was the airport camera closest to my location. So let's show you what I mean by that. There's my number 5 button. So remember, these are set up joysticks 1 through 20, and I go into the device menu. This is my Orbweaver. No calibration necessary because there are no axes. But when I hit number 5 button, selects the nearest airport camera. Now I mentioned 1 through 5 are my special cameras. Number 1 selects the next category. Number 2 selects the next camera within that category. Number 3 selects the previous camera in the current category. So 2 and 3 toggle forward and backward within whatever category you're in. Number 4 selects the camera with an assigned view ID. Now these are all 74 cameras. The ones with an assigned view ID, remember, they're the more important ones, the ones you use for flying. So the number 4 button toggles between the more important buttons. The number 5 selects the nearest external airport camera. You saw how we loaded those in. Now, on my Orbweaver, the next row is made up of the next row are going to be functional cameras. These are cameras that I use in the business of flying. The second row, you could arguably say the special cameras are kind of fun, they're kind of nice to have, but the bread and butter buttons you'll be using all the time are in the second row. So the number 1 pilot view, the go-to view always is row 2, button number 1. That button right there. And for me, that's the pilot view. Oh. Always the pilot view is Cockpit. Number 1 is the pilot view, and that's my row 2, button 1. Row 2, button 2 is my second most view, and that is the only real external view that I need. Here's row 2, button 1. Here's row 2, button 2. The only external view that I really need all the time is my tail view. And the tail view is good for taxiing, and also using the left mouse button, you can get an overview of your entire surroundings. You can look at what's behind you, what's ahead of you. Great situational awareness. So what this is, it's a tail view that I've created that is pulled far back from the aircraft. And buttons 1 and buttons 2 are my most used buttons. Button 3, I use it for startup and for many other things, is my overhead button. Button 4 is my flight management computer button, and when setting up the airplane, these are often the most important buttons for initial setup while you're on the ground. And while I'm in flight, what I usually do is don't use the buttons because it takes away from the immersion. I want to fly as if my head's on a swivel. So during flying, I'll use the right mouse button and the mouse pad. And this allows me, because when I'm flying, looking at the overhead from this perspective is more realistic than looking at it from this perspective. So this is what you'd see while you were flying, and that's kind of an artificial view that's very helpful during setup, but it's not necessarily realistic as far as what you would see from the captain's seat. So while I'm on the ground and while I'm setting up, I'll toggle between the overhead view, and the flight management computer view. Number 5 view on the second row. Number 5 view, this button right here, second row, number 5, is my MCP, my multi-control panel. Again, it's helpful for using during setup, but also during flying. It's not as realistic. Remember, if you want realistic, you go to pilot view and then right mouse, and that's how you would see the MCP while flying. But here's the advantage of using this view. Go to your control panel and toggle most every view. If you have a program called XP Realistic or a more primitive program called Head Shake or Real View, you can use either of those, and that'll give you a camera that kind of bobs a little bit. It replicates the motion in flight. But in this view in particular, I would recommend leaving this set at none. And the reason is because in this view, you're going to be using your mouse to adjust your altitude, your heading, your airspeed, your course speeds, and you're going to be using this using the scroll wheel or the left and right mouse wheels. And if you move just a little bit off that button, what will happen is the scroll wheel will stop turning the dial and it'll become a zoom in, zoom out function. And that can be monstrously distractive. You're trying to tune in an altitude and suddenly your view gets zoomed in and zoomed out. So disable any effect that you have and also disable cockpit zoom. And that will prevent your scroll wheel from being a zoom button, but only do it on this particular view. Again, it's an artificial view to begin with. I like to always have retained mouse look position, so if I were to turn, it doesn't immediately snap back. Now, if you were to take off that mouse lock position, this would probably be one of the few screens that you would disable the mouse look. Also, many views that start out from the cockpit have a 2-second transition. And what that 2-second transition does, it allows you to have a little bit of realism. Well, let's see, there we went, it was so fast. I'm going to go in and change this to 2-second transition, and it'll be a gentler transition from the main view to the overhead view instead of a snapping like that. But with the views that you've set up for the artificial views, having that 2-second is not as important, in my opinion. Okay, so moving on to the third row. The third row right along here. These are going to be some of your external views, special circumstance views, and animations. So my number 3 row first button is my nose wheel view like this, and this gets really useful for better pushback or any pushback that you might have. Again, with your right mouse, you can pan around to look at engine startup or to look at where your aircraft is being pushed to, but usually you'd have it set up for the pushback tug attachment, and that's the use in the row 3, number 1 button. Row 3, number 2 is my animation for the flyby. Row 3, number 3 is my animation for the orbit while I'm in flight. Remember, this is the one that spins around the longitudinal axis of the aircraft but it also has a vertical axis that would penetrate the ground if you were to use this on the ground. So use that with caution on the ground. My number 3 button is my animation, which is basically my pre-flight. This is the one that is safe to use on the ground. My number 5 button is my landing gear looking forward. This is also good for pushback, and it's really fun to use this one while taxiing or during landing gear extension or retraction. So that's row 3, number 5. Then we have the final row. Here along the bottom. Here's bottom row number 1, which is these are more frivolous cameras, ones you wouldn't use all the time. This is in first class. Maybe we're listening to the flight attendant during the pre-flight. Maybe we're looking out at the engine while it's spooling up. This is a cabin camera. Maybe we're looking at some of the other passengers. Number 2 is a radio stack camera, one I don't use very often. Number 3, this is a really useful camera to have for engine startup. Not only do you have the engine cutoff handles here, you can also see the EFA screen, so you can monitor the N2 spin up, and you can apply fuel at the correct time. But also notice how leave a 4-inch gap, or in my case 4 inches, yours probably may not be quite as big, but leave a little bit of a gap, because if your mouse drops to the lower part of the screen, you're going to get what's called the mini control panel. And the mini control panel shows all of your available cameras. These are cameras that have an assigned view, and there might be times that you want to use this mini control panel to go to various cameras without having to use the Orbweaver. But you don't want the situation where you're trying to reach for the engine fuel cutoff. Let's say you're coming to the end of the flight and you want to reach for that engine fuel cutoff, and you accidentally hit the mini control menu bar. So you want to be able to reach these cutoffs, or reach these switches, or maybe the stabilizer trim switches, without necessarily setting off the mini control bar at the bottom. Okay, that's number 4. Oh, number 3. That's number 3. Number 4 is my electronic flight bag, and it can also be used if you travel up from that a little bit. It can be used to do a left taxi check. You want to check the external area, or maybe you're about to take the runway and you want to check for traffic on the left side. You would use that control. And then number 5 is a similar control on the right side. There you can see my first officer's lovely face, but you can get that view. So those are my Orbix buttons, and I'll go through them. And again, the way to set them up is to go into the settings, and what you're looking for, I'll take any camera. Here's this button, doesn't really matter which one I use. What you're looking for is SRS, Stick and Rudder Studios. When you first installed X-Plane, or an X-Camera, SRS category was created, which is Stick and Rudder Studios. And so go to the top of the Stick and Rudder Studios, and within this category are all the possible commands. So I have 20 buttons that are assignable. And here's SRS, And there's X camera. And here are all the commands that I have the ability to assign. The ones I use are selects the next category, selects the next category, selects the next camera within the category, selects the previous camera within the category, selects the next camera that has a view ID assignment, selects the nearest airport camera, and those are all my next camera. Here we go. Select camera in the category. Anyway, they're all in here. And select the nearest airport camera. Those are my special cameras. And then the routine cameras are a little further down here. Select the camera with ID assignment, with the view ID of 1, view ID of 2, view ID of 3, view ID of 4, and so on until you have every button assigned. Now, the way you can check to make sure you're using all your buttons, but you're not overlapping a function, is to go to Control Panel, File, Display View ID Assignments, and here you can see everything that's assigned. What you want to do is look for all 20 of your buttons. It's nice if you have them numerical order here. They don't have to be. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then I have my special, my animations are 48, 49, and 50. And I number them that way so that if I go to a different aircraft, I don't have to worry about how many cameras I've assigned for functions. 48, 49, and 50 will always be the external animations. That, and if you have a duplicate assignment, you'll get a warning to help clear that assignment and to resolve that conflict. So, have fun setting up X-plane, X-camera. It can be time-consuming, but once it's complete, you'll find that it is a wonderful friend on the flight deck, and you won't be able to imagine flying without it. Have a great day.